Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda.
And we're your hosts.
We're a traveling couple and digital nomads taking you on our adventures as we explore locations, destinations, and careers.
Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. We are super grateful and excited that you're here with us today. We are really excited for today's interview. Today on the podcast, we are joined by Nate Ritter. Nate has been a tech executive and entrepreneur for most of his career. He's done a ton of really cool stuff in the tech space, which we'll talk about. And one of the things that we're really going to hone in on is advising startups at Techstars and building room steals. So we're going to talk about travel hacking, how you can travel a little bit cheaper and maybe get a couple deals along the way, which I think we're all into. And then he's also been traveling with his family and his kids full-time in an RV while working. So we're definitely going to dive into that and just super excited to have Nate here and get into this awesome conversation. So Nate, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Amanda. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on. And I would love to hear where you're joining us from today.
Yeah, well, today I'm joining you from just outside my brother-in-law's house in Port Townsend, Washington state in the United States. And we're here for we've been here for about 2 weeks. We'll be here for another 2 weeks. This is the longest stop on our journey, but generally speaking, we've gone up the West Coast and then we're going to be heading east from here in the next couple of weeks. So today it's Port Townsend, Washington.
Awesome. Yeah. And I want to get into this current journey and everything about the background on that. But before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about your history with travel and kind of, adventures outside of the States, in the States, and kind of how you fell in love with that part of, life, travel and that type of thing?
Yeah, definitely. I love this. This is the thing I like to wake up in the morning for. It's just talking about travel and how fun it is and how eye-opening it is. But for me, it started like probably about when my wife and I were married. Prior to that, my family, our version of travel was really about kind of just camping in the local Pacific Northwest area. We didn't really go too far out of that, except for maybe a couple times we went to the traditional like Disneyland, or my parents had rented a boat. And so we took some time to go up through the Puget Sound and see some islands and get up into Canada. But outside of that, I mean, those were really the two big trips that we kind of took out. And it wasn't until I kind of broke away from home that I started driving around and seeing more. And so right after I spent a little time in a 1-year college, I grabbed a friend of mine and we traveled around. This was the first big trip I had ever done. We traveled around the United States and visited all the friends from that college. And that was eye-opening just within the United States itself, just seeing all the differences there. But, even in the United States, it's all kind of, there's differences that you can respect, but it's still a lot of the same culture, I'm sure, as you know. And so when my wife and I got together, we had this long conversation about what does success look like to us? What is that? How do we define that? And what does it mean to us? And not just success, but like other parts of life that are important. And for both of us, travel was very important. And she had lived in Sweden for a year and traveled around Western Europe. I had never really been outside of Canada and the United States, but I've traveled 35 states or something by that point. And so we said we would switch. And basically I would tour her around the United States and show her what I know. And she would do the same for me in Western Europe. And then we'd kind of adventure off from there. But that was always a part of what we thought we wanted her life to be like. And we even talked about at that point, I mean, she was like 19 at the time, but we talked about like, what would it be like if we had kids and how would they fit into that desire of ours? And it was really about this belief that, wherever we go and whatever we do, our kids are going to, follow along in those paths and we'll help them adapt to the travel situations that we wanted to be into. And that meant going international or, going anywhere we wanted to go. And so we just kept traveling. And when we had kids, we put them on planes, we got them passports. They were 18 months old and we were, you're doing the whole bucket baby from, one bucket to another and situation. And, Yeah, and it was great. And we spent a month in Paris with a 3-year-old and a 18-month-old. And I mean, it's just those times actually are really easy to travel with kids, believe it or not. And I think all of that, the whole history there, it just continues every time we go out and we do something. It confirms, like, for us, this is what we really, really enjoy in life, is seeing new things and experiencing new cultures and meeting new people and trying new languages and all the different crazy stories that you end up with out of that. So that's kind of been our journey. And along the way, we've done things like travel hacking with credit card points. And I've always been interested in building things. So it kind of just all culminated at this point to where we are today. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's really cool to hear, and also just really inspiring for us. And like we said offline before we hit record, we have a pretty new little baby, and we've just been taking her on little road trips so far in Mexico, and looking forward to getting her more international and on planes and stuff like that. But it certainly already feels different, and she's not even on the move yet. So it's cool to hear that even having 3-year-old and 18-month-old was a good time to travel. So that's very cool. And I'd love to hear a little bit about like how you guys decided to go full time into an RV, where that idea came from, what that's been like, all of that type of stuff.
Yeah. Well, so we do things rather spontaneously. Sometimes it usually takes us about a month from idea to execution. For whatever reason, we just move really fast. I think we get something in our head, and we want to do it, it doesn't take us long to actually make it a reality. So we moved from Austin to San Diego, and everything was still pretty well shut down at that point. And I think we, along with everybody else, were pretty fidgety and wanting to get moving again with all the COVID shutdowns and regulations. And since our kids hadn't been vaccinated, and we kind of felt like it wasn't a great time for us to go out and try and cross borders, and we just didn't know what the regulations were going to be. And but we still had this like itch for the last few years to travel. And I think this is I don't know, it feels common to me now. Like, I think how like when you buy a car or you buy something or a jacket, and you all of a sudden you see that jacket or that car everywhere. I feel like that's kind of how it is with RVs right now. Like, we've gotten into this life, and now I feel like I'm telling the story that everybody's telling. We were sitting around, and it was COVID, and we were tired, and we wanted to travel, and so we decided RVing was the right thing for us. And that's kind of the general consensus that I hear from a lot of people, a lot of families, young families that are in doing this. And that was our story as well. We sat around, we watched a lot of YouTube travelers, and kind of everybody was kind of doing the same thing. And we thought, we really, really wanted to travel, and we can't cross borders. We didn't feel like that was a good idea. And so we thought, what else could we do? And I've worked remote for quite some time on and off. And so that was natural to me. And so it was just a simple, I guess it was a decision that we just needed to make. And we thought, okay, well, this is what we want to do. And a week or two later, we found a model we liked and contacted somebody. And there was one in our area. Thankfully, there was only 2 in the country at the time. And we were the first ones to contact them. And we did the tour. And what I didn't know when I did the tour was how many people were waiting behind me. But the gentleman asked, he's like, okay, so do you want it? And I'm like, well, I want to talk about it a bit with my wife. And he's like, well, so I looked outside, there's 10 people in line waiting to buy. I said, okay, I'll buy it. So we bought it. And he's like, do you want the truck too? I'm like, that's a bit much, but yeah, sure. We'll take the truck. So it all happened really, really quickly. So at about a month from the idea of like, hey, we should do this, to, hey, we bought a rig and we're going to do this. And it took about 1 month time. And then we were in it for a short period, for about 2 months, where we kind of traveled around just to kind of test it out and see how things went. And then we came back, sold everything in about a month, and then jumped into it. And that was from San Diego on. And we made a few trips, but generally speaking, we've kind of gone up the West Coast from there. So.
Yeah. What did the first couple months look like in terms of where you guys went, how you guys got adjusted to the, living? I'm sure, especially with like younger children, it's like they like to use space and throw things all over the place. How did you guys kind of adapt to that?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, we've never been one to really have a ton of stuff. Every time we move a lot anyway, just because we like kind of the change of scenery. So we don't really keep a ton of stuff, and the kids are pretty good about that. I think the most things they have is like stuffed animals, so they're squishy and those kinds of things. But and we limited those as well, so everything gets trimmed down. But I think the first 2 months that we went, because it was kind of like we felt comfortable traveling around the United States after COVID. We decided, since our baby was born during COVID and nobody had seen her for the first year and a half of her life, we thought we needed to do a grandparent tour. So we went from San Diego up into Colorado, stayed a week or so with one set of grandparents, and then went over to Missouri, stayed a couple of weeks with another set of grandparents, and then came back. And during that time, the hardest part was actually that I was working for another company as a CTO. And about halfway through that trip, I kind of decided like I needed to focus on this startup that I was building. We were getting some traction that was very important to us, and we felt like it was time. And so I had quit my job halfway through that trip, and it actually made the trip back much more relaxing because I felt free, like I could kind of breathe again. Where I don't know, the entrepreneurship thing really plays to me in a big way. So, um, so in coming back, I think everybody was much more relaxed, myself included, and the kids just adapt. I think they're when they're really young, they adapt even better. But even at 8 and 11, our two older boys, they adapted really well, and even to this day they're like, we really love traveling. And there's stories I could tell about some of the things that they've told other people while we've been traveling. It's been really fun, and not prodded or poked to tell the stories. They just came out of their mouths. And so it's nice to see that they actually appreciate what we're doing as well. And there's some hard moments too, the communities that we don't get to be a part of, and the soccer teams and those things. But I think we have some plans for that this summer as well, to try and find bits and pieces of that. But they do make friends well, and not having stuff has really not changed any of our lives in a drastic way. Like, I kind of appreciate not, just having a small set of clothes and just a few things. Like, I'm actually looking forward to trimming this down even more and getting rid of the RV and all the other things inside of it, and then going internationally. And that's the hope, as soon as we can. But that's kind of the next step. And I think it's going to be amazing. And I think as a family, we gel together. We come together in hard times instead of, splitting apart. We're in a 400 square foot place. Like, you can't do anything but come together. So you need to take your space, but then we kind of always return back, and it's a nice feeling. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds like such a cool experience for like you and your wife to have. And then also just really awesome for your kids at such a young age to just have this quality time as a family, and then be able to, see grandparents and see, more of the country that they're from, and just explore a little bit. And it's really cool to hear. It's really cool to hear whenever, people have traveled with kids, and especially small kids, to hear them, feel excited about the experiences they're having and hear that they're adapting well and whatnot. I think that that's really, really cool for us. And one thing I'm curious about with working or with living in an RV is working, because you said you were working full time, for another company, and then diving into entrepreneurship. And both of those are like, you probably need some like focus time. Did you have like a dedicated space in the RV? Did you go to co-working spaces or cafes, or how did you kind of manage your schedule with that?
Yeah, it was really important with the model that we chose that we had something where I could work within the rig, and that we had also some internet kind of redundancy too. So we needed to be able to have multiple ways of connecting to the internet. And we've kind of did quite a bit of research, and then decided that on that 2 month stint at the very beginning, that we would test out. We had two options at the time, both cell phone providers, and we thought we would test that out first. And if that didn't work, then we would kind of upgrade to another set that would combine a bunch of things. So the important part for us was really to make sure that no matter where we were, that I had the ability to work. And so we do check internet service before we go to a place. And if we have to go through it, and there's no service, then at this point, being on my own, I can go ahead and tell my team, like, this is what's happening. I'm going to be out for a week, but that's pretty rare now. And in fact, I just got the message from Starlink that I have Starlink on order. So it's coming in the next couple of days. I'm super excited about that. But that being said, like, for working, we chose an RV. We have a fifth wheel. We have the ability to detach, and we can drive the truck around. And it gives the kids and my wife the ability to go do things for homeschooling that, we're not all encompassed in one, like Class A, where you have to drive the thing. So we can park it. And then what we've done is, we were looking at a rig, that I would use like a whole room for my office. But I felt kind of bad about that, because then the kids were all crammed up for sleeping arrangements in different places. And I'd have this huge room that's all to my office. And I'm like, that doesn't feel right. But what we ended up doing is, we made a really unique, office space where in an RV, the front of the RV is usually, the master bedroom. And in our case, the bed faces in the same direction. And so it lifts. And so there's these hydraulics that are underneath it. And underneath that, what we did is we took these hinges for kind of this coffee table pull out. And we put a couple of those together, put a board across it. And we custom designed with a friend of mine who's a woodworker, an office space that basically pulls out of the bottom storage area underneath the bed. And then I set up a hunting blind chair, which comes in 2 pieces. And so everything can kind of come apart. And in 5 minutes, I have an office set up, and it's actually pretty nice. So that works really well for what we're doing. And internet wise, like I said, the redundancy with cell towers and then now Starlink coming around, is really helpful. And so it's not so difficult kind of being the entrepreneur. I think if I was working for someone else, and I've talked with a lot of people who are on the road in an RV, working for companies that need to have that internet connection. I think Starlink is the number one thing to do, but also really making sure that whatever site that they're at has internet service. And they usually stay for a couple of weeks at a time. And we move a little faster than that. So we're a little bit more flexible than most, I think. Just simply because I kind of run my own company as opposed to working for somebody else. But those are the concerns, and those are good questions, because those are big concerns when you were doing this kind of lifestyle. But we've figured out, I think it works out really well for us.
Yeah, and Nate, you kind of hit on it a little bit at the end there, but I was curious about how you guys how it looks kind of week to week as you guys are traveling. Do you tend to like travel during the day or travel on weekends, or how long do you typically stay in places? How do you decide where you want to go next and kind of balance all that travel planning?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer that last question first. How do we decide where we go next? We have generally it's pretty fly by night. We kind of pinpoint a big destination, maybe months away, and kind of work our way in that direction. And we'd like to be more spontaneous with where we go. But I think with all the RVs that are hitting the market and all the families and other people who are out there, it's getting a little more compressed. So we do start making reservations now. But in regards to the kind of travel style, we try to stay a week at a time, just to kind of have, for 2 reasons. We found that like at least a week, maybe 2, is good for our family stability. The kids feel structure. With schooling, my wife schools them from Monday to Thursday, then they take Friday off, or they go do some sort of adventure with, or it might have something to do with school, but maybe they go visit an aquarium or something like that, but it's a little bit more outside the rig. And then for me, just because because I have a team that I still work with, I want to keep some semblance of normalcy for the team. And so usually we try to work Monday through Friday. But that doesn't always work. Sometimes you can't get reservations at sites, or sometimes boondocking is tricky, or something happens there. So as things shift, the way that we've decided right now to work is, We try to make reservations Monday through or for a week or two, but if that doesn't work out and we have to move, let's say sometime middle of the week, we kind of reset um, all of our days. So the day before is usually a rest day. And we just try not to do much at all. We just kind of hang out with the family and go explore or just hang out in the rig or whatever we want to do there. The day of, we travel during the day. Traveling with RVs during the day is pretty dangerous. You can run into trees and things you don't see. And it's pretty hard to navigate. So we go during the day and we try to stick to 4 hours or less, which is a pretty typical kind of RV. There's a mantra 333. So I think it's something like, only drive 3 hours, be there by 3 p.m. And it's like, 300 miles or less or something like that. And we extend that a little bit, but that's a pretty good rule for RVing. And we thought, we're younger than the traditional 65-year-old RVer. We could stretch that like to 6 or 7 hours. It is exhausting. So we don't do that anymore. We did that on the first 2 months, and just because we had to move through the States really quickly because I was working for somebody else. And so we moved on the weekends, but now we move anytime. But the idea is still to keep it relatively short. And it's just so much more relaxing to do that way. But whatever day we move, so I take that day off completely. And then the next day is we kind of start over. And so whatever day that happens to be, it's our Monday. And so I'll work 5 days. My wife will school 4 days. And then if we have to move in between, then we kind of reset and do the same thing again. Usually we end up sometime on the weekends. We would leave on Friday or Sunday or something like that. And it usually works out to be pretty consistent. But when it doesn't, that's kind of how we do our week so that everybody understands what happens the day before a travel day, what happens on the travel day, and what happens the day after the travel day. And then everything else in between is kind of just daily life. So.
Awesome. And one question about the schooling, we're definitely like big fans of homeschooling, especially like with more of like a traveling nomadic lifestyle. But was that something you guys were doing before, or was it a result of trying to making this life decision? And then kind of either way, how have your kids kind of taken to the new change and the new form of schooling and the new form of living?
Yeah. So we've been doing homeschooling before the pandemic, before we got into this lifestyle for travel, RV travel. So we've been doing homeschooling from the beginning. I think there was 1 year or so that we put our kids, our two boys, into like a preschool sort of situation. But outside of that, we've always done homeschooling. And this is really my wife's story. So all credit goes to her. But we did that with intention, though, because we knew that we wanted to travel. We just didn't know how we were going to do it. We always kind of wanted to design our life in this way. And we thought if we put them into school, that will restrict us with the ability to travel later, because there's all these regulations about how many days you can be out of school and what happens if you miss and these things. And not only that, but I think later we kind of came to this understanding that like there are ways to do schooling that are more holistic than sit down, pay attention to a teacher for a subject for 30 minutes to 50 minutes, and then go to another subject. And so we found curriculum that, and I say we, but this is my wife. She's amazing. She found this curriculum called The Good and the Beautiful. And it's extremely holistic in how it teaches. And if you can think of I like to use the metaphor of a flower. Like if you look at a flower, it's both art, but it's also science, and it's also math. And if you look at the petals, there's a reason, they're generally odd numbers. If you look at them in a different way, they can be mathematically designed because they have a particular, there's the golden, I can't remember the name. It's like a golden spiral, golden triangle, something I can't remember, but it's basically like, it's a Fibonacci sequence. And so there's a mathematical view to it. There's an artistic view to it. So there's so many different ways you can look at the same object, and it doesn't have to be segregated into one particular subject. And The Good and the Beautiful is really great about that in the sense that it takes that holistic view and it kind of uses one subject and kind of teaches all the way around it. And then it uses other things like when you're learning a language, and as you guys probably know, spaced repetition is really, really powerful. And so it uses that in learning how to spell or things like that. So it's an amazing curriculum. We just found it recently, but we've always done the homeschooling with the idea that it will be the right setup for the life that we eventually want to figure out how to have. And so we kind of just said, that's what we need to do. And we'll figure it out along the way. And if we get to do if it enables us to do what we want, then fantastic, but it's not going to hold us back. That's what we did not want, something to hold us back from getting the ability to travel like this.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear. And then, I think Ryan asked like a 3-part question. So would love to hear a little bit about how your children have adapted to kind of this new lifestyle. Obviously, homeschooling is not a new component to it, but, going from being more settled or maybe being settled and then doing trips to like living full time in an RV.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd love to have their view on it. I think if I could speak to them, I think they're pretty flexible. I don't think the adaptation has really been that much of a stretch. I think the biggest changes, the biggest times where they've felt like they wish that we wouldn't make the change that we made was not about moving from one lifestyle, like kind of staying in a home, like a sticks and bricks, to a RV, or even traveling. Every time we go on a trip, we usually try and take it to 3 weeks to a month if we can. So those things don't really, I think they more excite them. They don't have any reservations. I think the only time where they ever had a reservation, it was when we were moving from this area here in Port Townsend to Austin, Texas. And the main reservation was because they were away from their family. They were away from their cousins. So I think that's the biggest piece. And I think that's also seen kind of like ripples of that in times where they've met somebody that they really enjoy to be around, or and a friend that they've met, and we've stayed for a couple weeks at a particular site, and they've met this friend and enjoyed hanging out with them, and then we have to go. And I think that part is hard. But outside of that, I think that's the one part that's difficult for them, is moving after meeting friends. Outside of that, everything else, they have adapted really well. My oldest boy is constantly looking for responsibilities. So he's like, when can I get up on top of the roof and help sweep the slats? Or, and the other ones are like, okay, I want to help do the water, or like they're always looking for something to help to do, which is really nice. And they will always want to learn. And there's always a kind of a carrot at the end of it too. So sometimes it's just being on top of the rig because it's something that they don't get to do. But other times, like, if you're responsible in these areas, then you would earn like a pocket knife so you can go and sharpen sticks or something. And, that's for boys, that's like super exciting because they're like, I get something dangerous, which is fun. But yeah, I think it's I can't say that there's been any negatives whatsoever other than the friendship and the piece and the community piece with their friends and family that they've really not adapted well to. Everything else, I mean, like I said, we've been moving or we've been traveling since they were very young. So they're used to this kind of possibility of going someplace new constantly, and they're not afraid of it. And I think that's what we wanted to instill in them from the very beginning, is the idea you could go anywhere, anytime, and be any place, and that's not a restriction. So far, I got to say, like it's been working. So our master plan.
Awesome, yeah. And so I was curious. I know you mentioned going up and down the West Coast a bit, but kind of just at like the super high level, kind of how many places have you been? How many states have you been to? And kind of what have the travels look like over I guess it would be, what has it been, like a year and a half?
It's only been 6 months now. Okay. Yeah, but we plan on being in it for probably at least until December or January, if not longer. We originally planned on it being 2 years. But we think we might cut it short just simply because we think we might be able to feel good about going international earlier than we originally expected. But we'll see. That's the plan originally was to kind of do the West Coast and then kind of zigzag through the middle of the country and then do the East Coast. And that would take up the 2 years. But we've kind of changed our plans. So now it's go up the West Coast, head straight across and kind of zigzag our way across, but hit like Michigan. And I think we'll dip down into Missouri to see my parents and then back up again. But then really the idea is to hit Maine, and neither of us had ever been to Maine. And so, and my wife especially has not done anything on the East Coast. And so we really want to spend our time from Maine on down to Florida. And we have reservations in Florida in the Keys right around Christmas time. So that'll be really fun to kind of follow the colors. And then after that, we're just not sure what's going to take place yet. We're kind of flip-flopping back and forth whether or not we're going to sell the whole thing and then go international again, or if we'll keep going, or maybe we'll go back to San Diego and spend a little more time there, which is where we have been for 10 years. Kind of that's where we feel like our home is. So yeah, that's high level. That's kind of the general plan today. But if we talk again in a couple months, that might change. So you never know.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for sharing all of that. That's really awesome. And yeah, I think we totally understand. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, and it feels a little bit challenging to make like really far out plans. So it sounds like you guys have an awesome plan for the rest of 2022. And then, yeah, we're excited to follow along and just see where life takes you, whether or not that's continuing to RV, settling down in San Diego, or maybe going international. And I want to switch gears just a little bit. You'd mentioned part of your story was kind of, finding deals and doing travel hacking. Can you tell us a little bit about like where that started and just kind of how that's been a part of your story in your life over the years?
Yeah, it was a really funny. I had a friend who he's amazing, and I saw him and his family travel, but he works for a church, and I knew that he wasn't paid, very, very well. And so I was like, "How are you traveling?" Because they've been to some crazy places, and I was like, "How do you make that happen?" And finally, one day, I bugged him enough, and he told me, and he showed me he had a Ziploc bag that he held up that had probably 20 credit cards in it, and I was like, "What are you doing?" My thought was, he's putting everything on credit cards and then he's going to be in major trouble later in life or something. But what turned out was the credit card churning and what they call credit card hacking or travel hacking. And so they would take out the credit cards to get the bonus points, make the spend requirements that you needed to do to get those bonus points. And then over time, eventually they would cancel that card and come back around the next year or whatever it might be that the rules stated, and pick those kinds of credit cards up again. And he taught me kind of how to do it. And I was hooked from that point forward. And then my wife and I, for the next 10 years, used those tactics to fly internationally and domestically. Internationally once a year, domestically usually 2 or 3 times a year. And so we would fly and stay in hotels, and we had not paid for a flight or a hotel for 10 years in doing that. And I was hooked. I was like, this is the best way to travel ever. Come to find out later, this is pretty much North American, or maybe even, I'm not sure how much Canada gets into this, but in the United States, this is a big deal. But everywhere else in the world, for the most part, they have a lot of trouble doing this because they don't have the credit card point that we do. Those offers on those credit cards. But we also did a bunch of different schemes. So once I kind of got into finding the loopholes and understanding where they were, there were schemes out there where, like for instance, home sharing networks would pop up, and there would be a new startup that would come up that would give you some points for doing something. And so I would join that. I would get the points, and it might be like you have to put your home up on the network, but you don't necessarily have to rent it out, and they'd give you 2 weeks worth of points or something like that. So I would do those kinds of things and then swap them around. And sometimes their valuation of points were so low that you could literally buy, like you could go to, I don't know, Panama or Colombia or something and get an entire like mansion for like $50 a night. And I was like, this is incredible. And for a while there, we almost decided to Airbnb our own home and take and just buy up as many of those types of points as we could and just go live that way. But I'm glad we didn't, because that was short term. They eventually caught on that there was some value there that we were leaving on the table, and they changed the point structure. But those kinds of little loopholes exist all over the place, and so we started to just pick up on them. And I was kind of hooked on finding the loopholes, and that's how I got into kind of the travel hacking world. And after that, I just kind of joined up with other travel companies and helped them with their technology, and kind of leveraged my skill set in that industry, and that turned into kind of the next steps. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really awesome. That's really cool to hear. And as you were saying, like, oh yeah, we traveled that way for like 10 years and didn't pay for like flights and rooms. I was like, what? That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm not the only one who had that reaction listening to this.
Yeah, it was, I look back at it now and I tell this story, and it's so funny because I didn't think, I mean, I enjoyed it. I loved it, but I didn't think how big of a deal that was, until now. You look back and you're like, wow, it's been 10 years of doing that. And it's definitely paid for itself over, quite a few times over.
Yeah, for sure. And so I want to talk about room steals, but maybe before we get there, do you have any tips for anyone who's listening who maybe wants to get started with, travel hacking, saving a little bit of money, spending less money on things like flights and accommodation and that type of thing?
Yeah, I think, the big one at least for the United States, the big one is to look at the credit card churning or credit card hacking. Just because the bonus offers that they give you. And I think some people, when I talk to them about this, initially, they're like, oh yeah, I have my Southwest card that I get 1 point for every dollar I spend. And that's great, but 1 point is worth about 1 penny or maybe 2 cents. So, it's going to take you a long time to do that. And that's why these bonus points are, that they give for taking out a new credit card are so valuable, because it's 50,000 points. So you're looking at, maybe $500 to $1,000 worth of travel. And there are restrictions that come in. There are ways to do this that you don't you don't want to get kind of blacklisted by the credit card companies, and they know that this is going on, so it's not like it's new to them. But they do have a kind of set of behaviors that you need to follow, to be careful about. But I would say for those things, there's plenty of courses out there, and I don't have any one in particular that I would recommend. I think there's a lot that are good, but you might follow the points guy on kind of all the social media, but also he has the points. I think it's thepointsguy.com. And he's probably the biggest name in the whole credit card churning area. So I would start with that, and then really, if you find yourself as somewhat like I'm not really a type A personality, but if you are, definitely dig into that if you're into the United States. Because I think type A personalities who can organize those things they're the ones who really get the most use out of it. Myself, I'm not that way, but I kind of 80-20 it and try and do the best that I can, and it still works out. So just be organized and don't go into debt. I mean, this is credit cards, but like the point is you're paying everything off every month. So otherwise, if you go into debt, then you're really ruining the whole idea here, and it's not really giving you the value that you should. So those are kind of some like basic tips for starters, for at least for the US. For everybody else that doesn't have these credit card points systems, I think the best thing that I've ever experienced has always been to talk. This is going to sound super old school comparatively, but I think to talk to the hoteliers. With flights, it's hard because you really either can play this game where you're getting points through some other third party, or you have to go straight to, discount airlines or whatever. There's no margin in flights. That's one of the problems with the industry, is that, or with trying to find deals in that industry. So there are newsletters. If you're in the UK, Jack's, I think it's Jack's Cheap Flights. If you're in the US, Scott's Cheap Flights. And there are other newsletters around Dollar Flight Club and Fare Drop. And these are great opportunities to get cheap airfare. You have to be flexible. So they're going to come and go. but if you have the opportunity to take them, then they can be amazing. Those are a couple, and then the ones outside of that, I would say, other than flights, is really talk to the hotelier, because there's a lot that they can do for you that I think that we just don't recognize when we're talking to the hotel groups. And there's a lot of margin available in those hotel rooms. So sometimes just talking to them about your situation, like, oh, I have an anniversary, I have a birthday, you'll get upgrades. You'll be treated a little differently depending on the hotel that you're in. And sometimes they just make it a much more pleasant experience. And sometimes those little upgrades are really valuable and fun. There's all kinds of other little schemes here and there, but they're probably onesie twosies and not enough to really like say, hey, this is what you should focus on. But I would say always talk to the front desk person and really kind of be nice. I guess that's the general rule there. It's amazing what happens when you're nice to somebody.
Yeah, I think that's always a good principle. And then, Nate, can you talk to us a little bit about room steals and how the idea came about for that and how it works?
Yeah. So with the travel hacking that I've done, looking at all of these loopholes and like how the systems work and those kinds of things. When I shifted and I was running an agency, and when I stopped running the agency and I started working for another company, and working into group-based bookings, I got access to this source of inventory that I had never seen before. And so I started checking around, and I looked up, and these are the two examples I love to use, but I looked up one in Portugal and one in Las Vegas. And I saw these hotels that the penthouse suites were going for $3,000 a night. And, traditionally, like you'd have to pay that retail. But on this inventory source, they were going for $300 a night. And so this is why I said, like, hotels have a ton of margin in there. And I thought, well, that's a 90% difference. Like, what's going on? Like, do I have access to buy this? Like, can I, as a normal, everyday Joe, can I do this? And started asking questions of the people I was working with who knew the industry well. And come to find out, like, yes, I could buy it, and it could just be for me. I didn't have to buy it as a group. I could just buy it for myself and my wife. And granted, like, I'm not going to buy a $300 a night hotel room myself, but if it's a $3,000 penthouse, maybe I'll think about it. So but because I saw this kind of area that I had never seen before, and all the different like little loopholes that I'd seen, I'd never seen this. And so I thought, well, if I have the access to this and I've never seen it, I wonder if I have the ability to kind of give this to people like me who like to travel hack and like to find loopholes. But this doesn't have to be a loophole. It could be just very simple. Like, why can't we just put this inventory out there, and why doesn't it exist already? And so I started asking those questions, and come to find out there's a few rules in the industry that restrict that inventory from being out there. And so you're not going to find this on Google as a public rate or Kayak or those kinds of things. And but the end result is I thought, well, I want to make this available to the world. And so I was working for a company who had access, and I said, we should do this as a product. And my boss at the time said, no, that'll never work. I don't want to do it. Okay, great. Like, can you sign this piece of paper that says I can do it if I want to? And he said, sure. So he signed it, and I got the ability to do it. And that company that I was working for got purchased, and I made sure that agreement was a part of my exit. And that is the starting point of room steals. And from that point forward, it was just making sure that we're doing the right things in the industry, but really just, we don't make any money on the transaction. And I think that's the biggest difference between us and everybody else. Everybody else in the whole industry makes money when you purchase the room on that room, and we don't make anything. We make our money on the subscription fee, but that's an annual fee. So you pay once, and then you get to book all of these rooms at the lowest rate, no margin added, no commission added, the lowest rate that we can give it to you at. And sometimes there are amazing deals that are available, and sometimes there's not. To be honest, it's not all the time. It's dependent upon what the hotels put out there, but they have the ability to put out this inventory and how they do it and when they do it. And it's usually a supply and demand sort of situation. But when they do it, sometimes these deals are just absolutely incredible, and you can save hundreds, if not thousands of dollars over and above even our annual fee on your first, 1 or 2 bookings. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's super awesome. And thanks for sharing all of that, the backstory and how that got started, because it's really cool to hear about that and hear how it works. And so if people want to, be saving more money on accommodation, is there like an email list they can join, or is it best to just go to the website to check things out, or what do you recommend?
Yeah. So the way that we designed it, so you can go to roomsteals.com and we have a couple different things that you can check out. What we really recommend is that you get the Chrome extension. If you use a Chrome browser on your desktop, you get the Chrome extension. And then as you're looking at other places like booking.com or hotels.com or Google Hotels or whatever, our extension just sits in the background. It doesn't do anything until you hit a specific hotel with specific dates. And then it will pop up and say what the comparison wholesale rate is for that. And if it's a great deal, then you can just jump over to our site, sign up for the subscription and take advantage of it. That's the easiest route. But if you wanted to use this just as a straight search engine like Expedia or Booking, you could go to roomsteals.com and do a search and see the comparisons. And just recently we started to put, we're actually putting into our results when you hit a hotel, we're going to try and tell you where the cheapest is, even if it's not us. So you can hit that page. And if we're not the cheapest, we'll say, okay, well, Zen Hotels or Expedia or Booking or whoever is the cheapest, and we'll give you a link straight to their site. So that's another way. The third way is we do have an email list. We call it a staycations email. It's kind of the beginning of our alerting system. But the idea is that you could put in a location that you are either in or you definitely want to go to. And if we find a deal that is a 4 or 5 star hotel that is more than 40% off and is happening in that weekend coming up, so you'll get the email on like a Thursday or Friday. If for that weekend only, you will get the email and it'll kind of be a last minute alert sort of situation. And those deals are really incredible to see sometimes. So those are kind of the three ways that you can check out room steals and what pricing we have.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for this whole conversation. It's been so awesome to hear about your journey, what it's like living in an RV, and then also just getting some inspiration for travel hacking and whatnot. Is there anywhere else people can go to follow along with you, follow along with your family online?
Yeah. We just started a YouTube channel not too long ago. So we do have that. So you can search for Nate and Tilly. You can follow us on Instagram, Nate and Tilly. You can join me on Twitter at Nate Ritter, all one word, NateRitter. We're pretty much out there. So Nate and Tilly or Nate Ritter, you can just Google any of that and you'll definitely find us. So.
Cool. We'll make sure that there's links for all of that in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today, Nate. This has been great.
Thanks, Nate.
It's been really fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you want more, make sure to check out The World Wonders Insider, available on Patreon at patreon.com/theworldwanderers.
For show notes, head over to theworldwanderers.com. Find us on social media at The World Wanderers Podcast and join the private Facebook community at World Wanderers, a community for travelers.
You can always get in touch with us at info@theworldwanderers.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps us find new listeners.
See you next time.